unfortunately, even though we had 30 years of recycling, and the last 10 years all the pledges and the UN pacts and whatnot, this year, well, 2022, the world produced more than ever single-use packaging.
Right.
So,
yeah. So we haven't solved it quite yet.
No, not yet.
Welcome to the Sustainable Healthcare Podcast. Today, we have the pleasure of welcoming Julia into the studio. Julia, she's an expert on packaging and has been working on packaging for 10-some years in a variety of organizations. So we're going to hear about how packaging, what's the status of packaging and what's the future of packaging when you look at the sustainability aspects of packaging. I'm super excited to be here today with Julia. And Julia, we are going to talk today about packaging. A huge problem and increasing problem, I think, that needs to be tackled. But first of all, Julia, welcome. And can you tell a little bit about your background? What brought you into packaging and into sustainability?
Hi, Krisfotter. Really happy to be here today. Thanks for inviting me. Big fan of the show. I've been working in the field of sustainability and circularity for 12 years now. Started off in doing my master's degree in environmental management in Iceland, and then slowly moved in Copenhagen. Worked a bit in the field of, back then it was very much CSR, but a lot of those things were very sort of window dressing, and I felt like it's not really clicking into what I imagined as business sustainability. And at some point, it was around the time when the first Ellen MacArthur Foundation reports came out, and I read them, and like something just clicked. And I felt like, yes, this is business sustainability. So I started really digging into the circular economy, and I spent over 3 years actually working for the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, living on the Isle of Wight, which was a great experience.
We have to learn more about the Isle of Wight at another time, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And then moved back here to Denmark and worked in corporate for the past couple of years. I worked with Rockwool and Pandora. And I think that the last in the last couple of months, I realized that the whole aspect of circularity in businesses is becoming very much focused on the materials and is very much reduced to, let's just do something on the outskirts of the business. Okay, change some of suppliers, use more recycled material, and then make more recyclable products, and like that's it. And I feel like it becomes all very narrowed down to this very engineering solutions. And it leaves the impact, the social impact, and the social value generation of circularity that I think has to be integrated into, any sustainability and circularity.
Right. So it leaves that social bit a little bit out.
Yeah, it's just like, where is it?
Yeah.
Where is it?
No, and I think it's a fair question, and I think we have to talk a little bit about recycling and the nature of recycling, because that's. It's such a fraught topic, I think, because it's so easy to be against, but it's also such a double-edged sword. There's already a lot of clear examples of how much of a double-edged sword it is when you look at, for example, the Danish waste-to-energy stations where we have to import stuff to get to sort of recycle materials into energy. But what brought you to packaging? I mean, what sort of led your career towards packaging, and what's going on with packaging these days, and what are the sustainability issues you find interesting around packaging?
Well, I think that packaging is so important because it's basically integral to any product that we develop, that we sell, and it becomes a huge issue. And it doesn't matter if you work in construction or if you work in medical or in textile, there is always packaging. Packaging is something that is needed as an integral part of our production consumption system. And it's right now it's becoming highly regulated. So I think it's a very interesting space to be in. And we have a big challenge with it, so that we need to tackle head on. So that's what brought me into it. I also worked for a couple of years for a company that is manufacturing compostable packaging. And I think that it's a very interesting space and interesting solution that, if used wisely, can help tackle some of those challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when you look at something like online, and how we buy stuff, it's changing, and it's changing actually in a way that requires more packaging. You're going from let's say bulk packaging to shops, to retail stores, to individual packaging for you and me when we go and shop online. When you look at the growth rates of online shopping, it's staggering, right? So we're really looking into an industry that's not just integral, like you said, to everything, but also an industry where I guess we're using more packaging than ever.
Yeah, absolutely. And we also, unfortunately, even though we had 30 years of recycling, and the last 10 years all the pledges and the UN pacts and whatnot, this year, 2022, the world produced more than ever single-use packaging.
Right.
So,
yeah. So we haven't solved it quite yet.
No, not yet.
Well, that's kind of sad, right? I mean, that we're not able to sort of break that trend. That we're not able to sort of year on year change the curve. And why do you think that is? I mean, what's you mentioned a little bit about how, at least from when you're sitting, that some of this circularity is some of the ways in which it's handled today is that it's been singled out as sort of a material issue. Can you expand on that? I mean, what's the challenge there? If I've understood it correct, the challenge.
You mean with circularity in general?
With circularity in general, and then its application, I guess, to packaging. Does it go for packaging as well?
I think that one problem is that the framing of circularity, a lot of companies and governments, it's not just corporates, use circularity as a synonym of recycling. So for them, it's a very narrow definition of, okay, you just close the loop of materials and continue, circulate whatever it is, and then you're good to go.
Yeah.
And I think that this is not. It has to come in a much broader sense. If we think about if you look at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation definition of circularity, it starts very much from the early design stage. What product do you design? How you design it, which material you use, and how it fits into the overall system. So if you design a cup, how this cup can last longer, how can it be maintained, how can it be repaired, how can it be serviced, and only at the very end you recycle it if needed. But I think for a lot of people, it's just easier to see this loop solution and not to think beyond that.
Yeah.
And it's also that easy to quantify, right? We have 10% recycled content. Easy. Right. How do you quantify and communicate how much you repaired and prevented waste?
Right. No, and I think let's do this, because I think that it's one of my biggest hang-ups. It is around recycling, because it's so hard to be against. I mean, how can you be against recycling? But when you do think about it, it's integral part of a linear economy. The more you produce, the more you can recycle. So in a sense, you're feeding into a linear economy in a lot of ways when you do recycling, because it's just a nice added step. You keep business as usual, and then you add the recycling, you're done. And it can be, and that's what we got to be, I think, careful about, that it doesn't become just that, because if it does that, then it's not really helpful.
Yeah.
And I think one thing that's really opened my eyes to this was a conversation I had with Walter Stohel, who mentioned that when you think about recycling, you have to think about the turnaround time of the product. If the turnaround time of the product is short, then recycling is futile. It is hopeless. It will not help us reduce our materials use, not significantly. And it's really a distraction. He gave an example of aluminium bottles. So think about our pant system in Denmark. And the interesting thing is, he said, if you start in January with 1 ton of aluminum for bottles, then by March you're all out of aluminum, even though you recycle at the rates that we do in Denmark, 96%. So, and I think very few people are aware of that. They're aware that they think it's a closed loop in a sense. It's not.
Absolutely not. And I totally agree. I think a lot of people think, like, oh, I recycle, so it's fine. And there is, if you look at the history behind recycling, it started in the 70s with, Coca-Cola and the big brands because they started to get a backlash about the environmental impacts of the single-use packaging. And then there was this whole campaign in the US with the crying Indian, and so deflecting the blame onto the consumer. Right. It's your responsibility to recycle. It's not our responsibility to rethink the product and how we bring it to you. It's your responsibility to recycle. Yeah. And I think it was so powerful and so impactful. I mean, until this day, so many people say, oh, yeah, it's recycled, so it's fine. Yeah. But even if we look at some of the most prominent recycling techniques, PET bottles, they can be only recycled 2-3 times, and that's probably the most recyclable material we have in packaging right now, in plastic packaging. Right. All the rest of the plastics, if they're recycled, it's once into a bag. There is nothing else to do with it.
Right. That's fascinating and frustrating in a sense, because wouldn't it be nice if we could just recycle? Then we wouldn't have to change our habits so very much. So recycling, a challenge to do right, and should be like it is at the Ellen MacArthur game, the last resort, right? I mean, it's one of the last things that you can do. Well, you can, of course, burn it for energy at the very, very end, but it's certainly something that's way, way down in the waste hierarchy. But when it comes to packaging, and if we move up the waste hierarchy in terms of saying what can we do, what are the have you seen ways in which you are able to avoid using packaging? Have you seen some interesting ways or examples of companies or situations where you've gone about it? Or conversely, have you seen some stupid ways in which packaging has sort of not been very well thought out?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of innovation in this space and a lot of things happening right now. I think that there are a lot of brands and companies that are rethinking their packaging, and this is interesting to see. Reducing, luckily they're going to also have to reduce, at least in the EU, through regulation. But there's also a lot of innovation coming into how we use packaging. There is a company that here in Denmark that developed a new system for coffee cups. So instead of using, in Denmark, we use almost 2 billion single-use.
2 billion? Wow,
I think
that's amazing.
I'm not
surprised.
It was something in that realm.
Yeah.
Maybe it's...
Yeah.
Okay, I need to check.
No, but I think it sounds about right with the population and our coffee consumption. It doesn't sound off.
It's really like staggering numbers of single-use plastic cups. And they never get recycled. They're layered. There's so many complexity in the material. Probably they just burned off in the waste to energy facilities. Right. But so instead of doing that, they have thought of an aluminium cup that is being, you can reuse it obviously almost infinite amount of times, and you have an app on your phone where you can pick it up from any coffee house and deliver it for any coffee house that is supporting the system. So I think that's a very clever way of using a material that is much more durable, supported by technology, and then prevent waste of, millions and millions of cups per year. So I think that's an interesting.
So moving to, in a sense,
reuse.
To reuse as a strategy to avoid, more packaging.
Exactly.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, because I've seen those coffee cups, and I'm just like, but I'm really bad at bringing one along. So and that's because it needs to change my habits as well. Do you have sort of any examples of where that you've seen sort of successfully or at a larger scale, our ability to change habits around our use, because it's so convenient. That's a problem, right? The lifestyle we have today.
I mean, I think that even if you look at the uptake of reusable water bottles, right. I mean, almost everyone have one now, and it became much more convenient. I think that if you travel to almost every airport, every big shopping mall have now reusing stations. So I definitely see that uptaking. And
Yeah, I saw a retail shop offering a refill as a water station as well, which is like super interesting because then it starts becoming more convenient.
Yeah.
That you carry the bottle around, but there's so many places where you can fill.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that I saw in one of the London airports, they had a refill station that each time you would refill your bottle, it will tell you how much plastic bottles it waste avoided.
Yeah.
And I think it's such a good incentive to like make people think about it.
Yeah. No, I think that's sort of the crux of the challenge. When you work long enough in this field, you realize, well, people are mostly susceptible to when things are easier and more convenient.
Yeah.
And hopefully also cheaper. That's an old adage that doesn't change. For people to change, if it's more expensive, if it's more inconvenient, it's tough.
Yeah.
It's tough to get people on board.
Absolutely. And I think that that's why I like this example of the Clean Hub cup, because you don't need to go bring it home. You don't need to wash it. You just like use it and then you drop it in the next coffee house and they take care of everything else. Right. So I think that's like and I think now with technology, we have so much more enablement of convenience in that way that.
Right. No, so reuse is obviously a way one and the primary, I guess, way in which you should try and avoid, because materials use does go down if you use multiple times. What are some other strategies that you can do when it comes to reducing your packaging footprint?
Well, I think that also we need to think about what we use packaging for. I think that there's primarily two ways of using packaging. One is when it's essential packaging. So, I mean, the Green Innovation Group is working in medical care. And, of course, when we use packaging in application of sanitation and medical applications, it's very important to have it. It has a very important function. Same with some of the food applications. Not all of them, but in some of them it helps to prolong.
Yeah, there's good and bad food applications.
Exactly.
I saw a banana boxed in a plastic.
It's insanity. It's the definition of insanity.
I also saw a case where they peeled the orange and put it in a plastic box.
Yeah,
where you're like, oh, stop.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So there is again good and bad applications in that way, but there is also applications of packaging and access packaging just for branding's sake. I mean, we see companies, and even today, you buy something, I don't know, 10 grams of a product, and then the company offers you a box, and then a bag, and then a bowl, and then a box again, as a branding, as a, it's luxurious.
Right.
And then you end up with, 50 grams of product and 200 grams of packaging. And you're like, how do you get away with that?
Right.
How do consumers allow that to happen? How the regulator allow it to happen? It's insanity.
Right. And I think that's where you in pharma oftentimes, at least with medicines, oftentimes see that there's the footprint, actually the packaging sometimes is larger than the actual product, at least weight wise in terms of transportation and whatnot. That you have that discrepancy. But you did mention that when it comes to packaging, you're seeing some EU regulation also coming in place. What are the sort of the levers that they are looking at in terms of changing the game on packaging?
So I think that there are a couple of things. First of all, there is the single-use plastic directive that is already outlined, which plastic materials we cannot and cannot use. But there is also a regulation push for reusable packaging. So countries like France, by 2027, you're going to have at least 10% of your portfolio as reusable packaging.
Is that for all companies now have to?
Yeah,
wow.
I mean, at least all companies above certain size,
Right.
And then there is also the regulation that all packaging has to be recyclable by 2030, and that we need to reduce packaging waste by 15% by 2040, which, if you ask me, is way too far away and way too little. It's still under negotiations, so I hope there's going to be a push to remove
up the deadline.
Exactly. Up the deadline, or at least the ambition.
Or the ambition, yeah. 15% by 2040. Yeah, most people can sign up to that. I
Yeah,
think.
exactly. Yeah. So, but there is a lot of push for also overpackaging. Certain member states are trying.
Overpackaging.
Yeah.
How's that sort of defined? That's interesting.
So some of them looking at weight. Again,
Right.
like what we mentioned, is like you cannot have packaging weight more than the product itself.
Right.
Some of them are looking into the space, especially in e-packaging.
The
It's really
volume.
important.
Yeah.
Like sometimes you get like a huge box and there is like a pair of socks inside.
Right. Right.
So
So setting sort of parameters on which, you know,
Yeah.
how much over packaging are you allowed to have?
exactly.
Interesting.
So I hope that trend is going to continue
Right.
going and that more and more countries adopt it.
Right. And the over packaging, is that something that's on the books already, or is it something that there's people are still trying to figure out how to
In certain member states, if I'm not mistaken, France and perhaps Spain are looking into that.
to the over packaging
Yeah,
thing?
yeah,
Right.
yeah.
But not Denmark. Clean old Denmark.
Yeah,
Not
no.
yet. Okay.
And I think in Denmark, the whole packaging, especially plastic packaging for food, is insane. I mean, I'm coming from a different country, and I travel a lot for both work and private, and I'm always staggered when I go back into a Danish supermarket and everything is packed. And you're like, why? What is the purpose of that?
Yeah. Well, I guess it's culture. Apparently, it's part of it, right? What we've been trained to sort of see and appreciate, and that's part of it. So we talked a little bit about reuse was one way to get it right, and then when we talk about reducing plastics, are there other sort of, or sort of not plastics but packaging in general? Are there other sort of principles, design principles that sort of helps you get started? I mean, how do you get to a good place when it comes to packaging? What are there some rules of thumbs? Are there some takeaways that you sort of say that are generally applicable? That let's say you're sitting in a company right now and you've been given the packaging challenge. What to do?
Yeah.
What's the kind of first things to do when you're trying to tackle this?
Yeah, so I think that, of course, we reduce the amount in general, then reuse if possible, but then also look at what is the function of the packaging. Is it the function?
So define the function.
Yeah.
Understand really well what the function is.
Exactly. And then from that, you can also then decide how much packaging, which kind of packaging,
Right.
which materials to choose, what would be the, end of use solution. I don't like to say end of life. I prefer to say end of use solution.
Right.
How can you create a system to support that? Or maybe you can create a collaboration with others to support it. I think that it's not packaging per se, but the collaboration between Novo Nordisk now on the injection pens is very interesting.
Yeah.
Because they collaborate with other companies in the medical space.
Sanofi and Merck as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Think outside of the box. I mean, it's such a cliche, but like where else you can find collaboration to really provide a better solution.
Right.
In the end of the day, packaging used for a couple of minutes of the product. So try to think which function.
So define the function and understand over sort of the life cycle of that product what the function needs to be able to do.
Exactly.
And I guess what a word that keeps coming back when talking about is right sizing. But so right sizing is part of a functional answer. But I guess is there also something around materials and how you combine materials. Yeah. Because, for instance, if we go back to pharma, sometimes, you see combination of materials where you think, at least from the perspective of trying to preserve sort of the cleanliness of a waste stream, that's going to be difficult.
Yeah.
Are there some rules of thumbs when it comes to sort of getting the materials composition right? Or is that sort of down to functionality at the end of the day?
I mean, I think that there is definitely a way to rethink the materials and their combination.
Right.
Monomaterials are always better and easier to either reuse or recycle in the end of use. Yeah, I know that the blister packagings, there's like always a layer of glue and then the metal on top, and it's like, this is never going to get recycled.
No. That's the one I had in mind as well.
Yeah.
That type of packaging and combination of materials is extremely tough, super convenient, and I guess fit for purpose in a lot of ways. But also when it comes to the recycling part, really tough to deal with.
Yeah. And I think there is innovation in the space. Yesterday was at the Loop conference, and they had a company presenting that is like it's fiber based, so it is monomaterial. They claim it's recyclable. I haven't I haven't checked it, but it seems that it is moving away from fossil fuel derived plastics, and that's I think it's an interesting space.
Yeah, and I saw one company I've been following sort of on off is the Recip company, which is a concept where you know they support online shopping and so on. But what they do differently, I think, is that they're offering packaging that you can use multiple times, and then the notion is you use your packaging to send it out, but then after use it becomes a flat pack that you can send in again, so it can be used again, and the flat pack part of it makes it sort of easy to get back, to mail back, and I think when it comes to the last mile distribution, oftentimes trucks returning are pretty empty. So in that sense, you have an opportunity to sort of just, piggyback on that return stream in a sense, if you can get it organized right. So there are innovation taking place.
I met a couple of years ago in London, a company that is looking into rethink the medical space and the cold chain with wool-based products.
Yeah.
It's called Cool Wool or Wool Cool, one of them. So basically everything that is like used styrofoam today to deliver as a fridge, it provides the same functionality. It's obviously wool is derived from, is bio-based. It has much longer life cycle. It's also very light. It can be also then combined in the end of use and shipped back, like same with Recip. I think there's a lot of things happening, and we just need to...
I'm excited about the wool thing. I would love to open a package of wool. It would be the tactility of touching that versus the styrofoam or the plastic, the bubbles or whatever is filled into those packages. Sounds much more compelling in a sense.
Yeah.
Interesting. So if you look ahead, sort of what's you've already indicated sort of some of the future paths of packaging. You mentioned the legislation and the over packaging kind of things. But when you look ahead, so we haven't broken the curve yet on packaging. But what would it take? What does the future hold for us? I mean, what are the positive prospects that you see? What needs to happen?
I'm trying to remain positive. I think that what we see is a lot of companies rethinking their packaging right now. I think we definitely see a move at least away from the single-use plastic packaging, which is very welcomed, and much more paper-based packaging that is, has recycled content, it is recyclable. But that said, that is always creates the question of like, okay, this is still packaging that is, needs to be recycled. It still has a footprint. Is it always necessarily, do we need this packaging always? So I think that we see one shift to one direction, but it needs to like not rest on our laurels. And
so going more natural is one way, but that doesn't solve everything.
Exactly. And the reduce, reuse, rethink materials, rethink functionalities.
Right.
And only in the end of that, if we have to, for applications that's really needed for food, for medicine, then we can recycle it.
Yeah. Now, and I really like sort of the centerpiece for me that stands out is the thing that you have around the design where you think about what's the functionality.
Yeah.
Because I think that is the core of understanding what you're doing is to understand what does this packaging need to do.
Yeah, exactly.
It has to start there.
Exactly.
And I think that's sort of a key takeaway in a sense, right? Is to really think, well, what does this packaging need to do, and how do you leverage that in terms of getting it right, and not least getting it right in terms of the footprint of the packaging that you have. Is there any sort of last things where you want to leave sort of the audience with in terms of when they think about packaging and going forward? What are some good resources to look into and get inspiration from? I mean, where do you look for inspiration on packaging?
Well, in preparation for this podcast, I was looking for some, materials, and it's all very depressing.
It's underwhelming, or what?
Yeah. It's like you go into our organizations that are doing amazing things with the research, but it's like all the impacts of packaging and plastic on our health, and it's it's challenging.
Right.
But I think some of the interesting work that is done, for example, the Plastic Planet is a great NGO that
Plastic
is
Planet.
yeah,
Yeah.
that is working with a lot of brands around the world and really pioneering thinking behind beyond plastic. Like, how do we go plastic free?
Right.
So I would suggest looking into what they're doing.
Right.
Of course, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation is always a good space.
Sure.
And then, look for the innovators in the space. I think that's...
Right. So understanding functionality, getting partnerships really across industry are some good examples of trying to solve some of these issues.
Yeah.
But first and foremost, are there other ways in which you can serve the market? Can you reduce the overall footprint? Is it necessary even to?
Exactly.
Can we get multiple use?
Exactly. And I think...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Julia. It's been a pleasure to learn more about packaging. I'm sure we just scratched the surface, but that's the nature of this, right?
Exactly.
So much more to come. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Wow. Packaging, we haven't solved it quite yet, right? It was really interesting to hear sort of some of the tools that we can employ to become better at packaging. And remember, if you like this episode, engage, share, comment, and reach out. We can only solve this packaging challenge if we do it together. So please engage.